What if everything we know about history is wrong? What if the age of the dinosaurs, that vanished world of giants, didn't end 65 million years ago, but overlapped with something even more mysterious, the first civilization? Close your eyes for a moment and imagine it. Picture a world where intelligent beings walked among titanic reptiles, where early cities rose in the shadow of ancient monsters, where firelight flickered against scales larger than temple walls, and the first humans gazed upward at creatures that had ruled the earth since before time had a name. It sounds impossible. Everything we've been taught tells us that the dinosaurs vanished in a single catastrophic moment, leaving nothing behind but bones buried in stone. And then, after millions upon millions of years of silence, humanity emerged. Small, fragile, but clever enough to survive. Two separate chapters in Earth's story, divided by an abyss of time so vast that no bridge could ever span it. But what if that abyss was never as wide as we believed? What if the boundaries between ages were softer than stone, more permeable than we dared imagine? What if, in the twilight of one era and the dawn of another, something impossible happened? A moment when the old world and the new world touched, however briefly, and left behind whispers that we're only now beginning to hear. Tonight, we're going to explore that possibility, not with certainty, but with wonder, not with answers, but with questions that refuse to fade. We're going to walk through the mist between myth and science, between the known and the forbidden, and ask ourselves, could the dinosaurs and the first civilization have shared the same Earth? And if they did, what would that mean for everything we think we understand about our past? The story begins, as all stories must, with what we know, or what we think we know. 65 million years ago, the world ended, not slowly, not quietly, but in a moment of such violence that it rewrote the rules of existence itself. An asteroid, 6 miles wide, slammed into what is now the Yucatan Peninsula with the force of 1 billion atomic bombs. The impact carved a crater over 100 miles across and sent shockwaves rippling through the planet's crust. Tsunamis taller than mountains swept across coastlines. The sky filled with debris, rock, ash, and vaporized stone, so thick that sunlight vanished for months, perhaps years. In the darkness that followed, the world froze. Plants withered, herbivores starved, and the great predators, with nothing left to hunt, collapsed into extinction. The age of the dinosaurs, which had lasted for over 160 million years, ended in what geologists call the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event. 3/4 of all species on Earth disappeared, the giants fell, and the world belonged to the small, the hidden, the survivors. For millions of years after that, the Earth was quiet. Mammals, tiny nocturnal creatures that had lived in the shadows of the dinosaurs, began to spread. They grew larger, more diverse, more complex. Forests returned, oceans refilled with life. The planet healed slowly, patiently, as it always does. And then, much later, so much later, that the dinosaurs had become nothing but fossils pressed into stone, humanity appeared. The first hominids emerged in Africa around 7 million years ago. Homo sapiens, our species, arose only 300,000 years ago. We built tools, discovered fire, painted on cave walls, and eventually created civilizations that reached toward the stars. This is the timeline we've been taught. It's clean, it's logical, it's supported by mountains of evidence, fossils arranged in layers of rock, radiometric dating that measures the decay of isotopes, geological strata that tell the story of Earth's ages like pages in a book. But here's the thing about timelines. They're only as complete as the evidence we've found, and the Earth is vast. The fossil record is fragmented, incomplete, a puzzle with most of its pieces missing. For every creature we've discovered, there are countless others that left no trace. For every moment preserved in stone, there are millennia that vanished without a whisper. So what if, hidden in those gaps, something else happened? What if the extinction wasn't absolute? What if some dinosaurs survived, lingering in isolated pockets of the world, adapting, enduring, long after the asteroid's dust had settled? And what if, millions of years later, when the first intelligent beings began to walk upright and wonder about the world around them, they encountered those survivors? It's a question that defies everything we've been taught. But it's also a question that refuses to go away, because scattered across the world, buried in myth and rumor and strange anomalies that science struggles to explain, there are hints, faint, fragile but persistent, that the age of the dinosaurs and the age of humanity might not have been as separate as we believe. Let's begin with the myths, because long before we had paleontology, long before we understood extinction or evolution or deep time, humanity told stories about monsters. Every culture on Earth has them. Dragons in China, thunderbirds in North America, the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, the Leviathan in ancient Hebrew texts, the Makara in Hindu mythology, the Bunyip in Aboriginal Australian lore. These creatures appear in carvings, in oral traditions, in sacred texts that stretch back thousands of years. And they share something remarkable. They describe beings that sound in many ways like dinosaurs. Consider the dragons of China. They're depicted as massive, serpentine creatures with scales, claws, and sometimes wings. They're associated with water, with storms, with primal power. For centuries, scholars dismissed these as pure fantasy, symbols of natural forces, metaphors for rivers and weather. But then, in the 19th century, paleontologists began unearthing fossils of enormous reptiles in the same regions where dragon myths were strongest. Dinosaur bones, massive, ancient, undeniably real. Could it be coincidence? Perhaps. But the parallels are striking. In some Chinese provinces, dinosaur fossils were called dragon bones, long before modern science gave them a different name. Traditional medicine used these bones for centuries, grinding them into powders, believing they held the essence of the dragons from legend. What if those legends weren't invented from nothing? What if they were memories, distorted, mythologized, but rooted in something real? The same pattern appears across the world. In North America, indigenous tribes spoke of thunderbirds, gigantic birds with wingspans so vast they could blot out the sun, whose beating wings created thunder and whose eyes flashed lightning. Paleontologists have since discovered fossils of pterosaurs in North America, flying reptiles with wingspans reaching over 30 feet. The Quetzalcoatlus, one of the largest flying creatures ever to exist, soared over what is now Texas. Its wings stretched wider than a small airplane. If you saw its shadow pass overhead, wouldn't you remember it? Wouldn't you tell your children? And wouldn't they tell theirs? Until the memory became myth. In the jungles of the Congo, the Mokele Mbembe is described as a massive, long-necked creature that lives in remote swamps, overturning canoes, and avoiding human contact. Descriptions match almost eerily the sauropods, the long-necked herbivores like Brachiosaurus and Apatosaurus. Expeditions have searched for the creature for over a century, finding nothing conclusive, but the stories persist. The locals insist it's real. They describe it with the kind of detail that doesn't come from imagination alone. And then there's the Ica stones of Peru. Thousands of carved stones depicting humans alongside creatures that look unmistakably like dinosaurs. Stegosaurus-like animals with plates along their backs, long-necked sauropods, pterosaurs in flight. The stones are controversial, dismissed by many as modern hoaxes, but some date back centuries, found in pre-Columbian burial sites. If they're fake, why would ancient people carve creatures they had no way of knowing existed? And if they're real, what were they depicting? These myths don't prove anything, not on their own, but they ask a question that's hard to ignore. Why do so many cultures, separated by oceans and millennia, describe creatures that sound so much like dinosaurs? Why do these stories exist at all? If the dinosaurs vanished 65 million years before humanity even existed, could it be that extinction was never absolute? That some dinosaurs survived, hidden in the deepest jungles, the most remote islands, the places where humanity rarely ventured, and that when early humans encountered them, they didn't understand what they were seeing, only that they were massive, terrifying, and unlike anything else in their world? Or could it be something even stranger? Could it be that humanity itself is older than we think? That civilizations rose and fell long before recorded history? And that those ancient people walked a world where the last dinosaurs still lingered? To understand how that could be possible, we need to talk about time. Not the time we experience, seconds, minutes, hours, but deep time. Geological time. The kind of time that makes human history feel like a single breath in an endless wind. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Dinosaurs appeared around 230 million years ago and dominated the planet for over 160 million years. Humanity, by comparison, has existed for a fraction of that span. Homo sapiens have been around for 300,000 years. Recorded history, the part where we started writing things down, goes back only about 5,000 years. That means there are vast stretches of time we know almost nothing about. Millions of years where life existed, evolved and vanished, leaving behind only the faintest traces. The fossil record captures less than 1% of all species that ever lived. Most creatures left no fossils at all. They died in places where their bodies decayed, were scavenged, or were destroyed by geological forces before they could be preserved. So when we say the dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago, what we really mean is the last dinosaur fossils we've found date to 65 million years ago. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because we haven't found fossils of dinosaurs from later periods doesn't mean they didn't exist. It means we haven't found them yet, or that they existed in places and conditions where fossilization was impossible. And here's where things get interesting, because there are places on Earth where the fossil record is almost non-existent. Dense jungles where the soil is too acidic for bones to survive. Deep ocean trenches where nothing is ever preserved. Remote islands that have never been fully explored. If a population of dinosaurs survived in one of those places, adapting to a changing world, living in small numbers in isolated pockets. We might never find evidence of them. They could have persisted for millions of years after the mass extinction, slowly dwindling until they finally disappeared, or until they encountered something new. Now, let's talk about humanity. We know Homo sapiens appeared 300,000 years ago, but what about earlier hominids? What about the species that came before us? Homo erectus existed for nearly 2 million years. Homo habilis even earlier. These weren't modern humans, but they were intelligent. They made tools. They used fire. They had language, culture, social structures. What if some of those early hominids achieved more than we realize? What if, in the vast stretches of prehistory, they built things, shelters, communities, even early forms of civilization that left no trace? Wood rots, organic materials decay, stone structures can be buried, eroded, or mistaken for natural formations. If a civilization existed 1 million years ago, or 5 million, or 10 million, what would be left of it today? Almost nothing. A few anomalies. A handful of objects that don't fit the timeline. Whispers in the geological record that we don't know how to interpret. And if such a civilization existed during a time when some dinosaurs still survived, perhaps in isolated regions, perhaps in small populations clinging to existence, then the impossible becomes possible. The two ages could have overlapped. Not everywhere, not for long, but enough for encounters to happen. Enough for memories to form, enough for myths to be born. Let's explore those anomalies, because if the dinosaurs and early civilizations coexisted, there should be evidence. Strange, out-of-place evidence that doesn't fit the accepted timeline. And remarkably, such evidence exists. It's controversial, it's disputed, but it's there, waiting in the margins of history, refusing to be ignored. In 1968, a fossil hunter named William Meister was searching for trilobites in Utah when he split open a rock and found something impossible. Embedded in the stone, which dated to over 500 million years ago, was what appeared to be a human footprint. Not just any footprint, a footprint wearing a shoe. The print was clear, detailed, showing the outline of a heel and sole. Next to it, crushed beneath where the heel would have pressed down, was a trilobite fossil. The discovery was met with immediate skepticism. Scientists argued it was a natural formation, a coincidence of erosion that happened to resemble a footprint. But Meister wasn't the only one to find such prints. Similar discoveries have been reported in rocks of various ages, always dismissed, always explained away. But the question lingers. If even one of these prints is real, what does it mean? That humans, or something like humans, existed hundreds of millions of years before they were supposed to. Then there's the Paluxy River in Texas. In the 1930s, locals discovered dinosaur tracks preserved in the limestone riverbed. Massive three-toed prints from theropods, the predatory dinosaurs that walked on two legs. But alongside those tracks, some claimed to find human footprints, or at least prints that looked human. The tracks were studied, debated, and eventually dismissed by mainstream science as misidentified dinosaur prints or erosion patterns. But not everyone was convinced. Some researchers argued that the prints were genuine, that they showed clear evidence of a human foot, 5 toes, an arch, a heel. If true, it would mean humans and dinosaurs walked the same ground at the same time. The scientific community rejected this. pointing out that the prints lacked the detail and consistency of genuine human tracks. Yet the controversy never fully died. To this day, some believe the Paluxy River holds evidence of something we're not ready to accept. And then there are the OOPArts, out-of-place artifacts, objects that appear in geological layers where they shouldn't exist. A metallic sphere found in a Precambrian rock formation in South Africa, 3 billion years old. A hammer encased in Cretaceous rock in Texas, supposedly over 100 million years old. A spark plug found inside a geode that appeared to be ancient. Each of these discoveries has been challenged, debunked, or explained as hoaxes or misidentifications. But they keep appearing, and each time they ask the same question. What if our timeline is incomplete? Consider the Ica stones again. Thousands of them carved with images of humans interacting with dinosaurs, riding them, hunting them, living alongside them. The stones were brought to public attention in the 1960s by Dr. Javier Cabrera, a Peruvian physician who collected them obsessively. He claimed they were evidence of an advanced ancient civilization that coexisted with dinosaurs. Skeptics pointed out that many of the stones were likely modern forgeries created by locals to sell to tourists. Some of the carvers even admitted to faking them. But not all of the stones were modern. Some were found in pre-Columbian tombs, authenticated by archaeologists. And the images on those stones are harder to dismiss. They show creatures with long necks, spiked tails, and body shapes that match known dinosaur species. Species that weren't scientifically described until the 20th century. How could ancient people carve accurate depictions of dinosaurs unless they had seen them? Or at least seen images passed down from those who had? The same question applies to the Angkor Wat Temple in Cambodia. Built in the 12th century, the temple is covered in intricate carvings of animals, elephants, monkeys, birds, fish, and among them, in a small medallion on one of the walls, is a carving that looks remarkably like a stegosaurus. The plates along its back, the posture, the tail, it all matches. But stegosaurus fossils weren't discovered and reconstructed until the 1800s. How did a 12th century sculptor know what a stegosaurus looked like? Mainstream explanations suggest it's a stylized depiction of a known animal, a rhinoceros perhaps, or a chameleon with decorative embellishments. But the resemblance is striking, and it raises a possibility that's hard to shake. What if the sculptor was working from a description, or a memory, or a tradition that stretched back further than we realize? What if the image wasn't invented, but remembered? Now, let's consider the possibility from a different angle. Not that dinosaurs survived into the age of humans, but that humans, or something like humans, existed far earlier than we think. The idea of a pre-human civilization is one of the most controversial concepts in alternative history. Mainstream science rejects it outright, pointing to the lack of evidence. If an advanced civilization existed millions of years ago, where are the cities, the tools, the technology? Surely something would have survived, but would it? Consider what would remain of our own civilization if humanity vanished tomorrow. After 1,000 years, most buildings would collapse. After 10,000 years, almost all traces of our cities would be gone, reclaimed by nature. After 1,000,000 years, nearly everything would be eroded, buried, or subducted into the Earth's mantle by tectonic forces. A few things might survive, stone monuments perhaps, or objects made of materials that resist decay. But even those would be rare, scattered, and easily mistaken for natural formations. Now imagine a civilization that existed not 1,000,000 years ago, but 10 million, or 50 million, or 100 million. What would be left? Almost nothing. A handful of anomalies, strange objects that don't fit the timeline, myths and legends passed down through countless generations, distorted beyond recognition. This is the premise of the Silurian hypothesis, a thought experiment proposed by scientists in 2018. The hypothesis asks, if an industrial civilization existed on Earth millions of years before humans, would we be able to detect it? The answer, surprisingly, is maybe not. The geological record is incomplete, fossilization is rare, and the deeper you go into the past, the harder it becomes to distinguish between natural processes and the remnants of intelligence. The hypothesis doesn't claim that such a civilization existed. It simply points out that we can't rule it out. And if we can't rule it out for an industrial civilization, what about a pre-industrial one? A society that built with wood and stone, that lived in harmony with nature, that left behind only the faintest traces we might not recognize even if we found them. Some researchers have pointed to ancient structures that seem impossibly old or advanced for their supposed time period. The megalithic temples of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, built over 11,000 years ago, predate agriculture and settled civilization. The precision of the stones at Pumapunku in Bolivia, cut with such accuracy that they fit together without mortar, has led some to speculate about lost technologies. The Sphinx in Egypt, some argue, shows signs of water erosion that would require it to be far older than the traditional date of 2500 BCE, perhaps 10,000 years older or more. These claims are hotly debated. Mainstream archaeologists offer explanations rooted in known technologies and human ingenuity, but the debates themselves reveal something important. Our understanding of the past is not as complete as we like to believe. There are gaps, there are mysteries, and in those gaps, possibilities linger. What if one of those ancient civilizations, whether human or pre-human, existed during a time when the last dinosaurs still walked the earth? What if they encountered creatures that had survived the mass extinction, hidden in remote corners of the world? What if they carved images of those creatures, told stories about them, and passed those stories down through generations until they became myths? It's a radical idea, but it's not impossible. And the more we learn about the resilience of life, the more we realize that extinction is rarely absolute. Species adapt. They survive in unexpected places. They endure. Let's talk about living fossils, because if we want to understand how dinosaurs could have survived long after their supposed extinction, we need to look at creatures that have done exactly that. The coelacanth is perhaps the most famous example. This ancient fish was thought to have gone extinct with the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. Its fossils appeared in rocks from the age of the dinosaurs, and then nothing. No fossils from later periods, no evidence it had survived. Scientists assumed it was gone, another casualty of the mass extinction. Then, in 1938, a fisherman off the coast of South Africa caught one, alive, thriving. The discovery shocked the scientific world. Here was a creature that had supposedly been extinct for millions of years, swimming in the deep ocean, unchanged, as if time had forgotten it. Since then, coelacanths have been found in other locations, living in deep, isolated waters where they went unnoticed for millennia. The coelacanth isn't alone. The tuatara, a reptile native to New Zealand, is the last surviving member of an order that thrives. Creatures that survived mass extinctions and persisted in isolated environments, hidden from human eyes until recently. If a fish could survive undetected for 65 million years, why not a dinosaur? Why not a small population of pterosaurs living on remote islands, rarely seen by humans? Why not a group of theropods adapted to dense jungles, nocturnal, elusive? The world is vast. Even today, with satellites and technology, new species are discovered every year. Large species, mammals, reptiles. If we're still finding animals we didn't know existed, how can we be certain that nothing from the age of the dinosaurs survived? There are reports, scattered and unverified, of creatures that sound like living dinosaurs. In the Congo, the Mokalembembe. In Papua New Guinea, the ropen, a creature described as a large, flying reptile with leathery wings and a long tail, seen gliding over the jungle at night. In the Amazon, stories of massive serpents and reptilian creatures that don't match any known species. Are these misidentifications, hoaxes, or could they be the last remnants of a world we thought was gone? Cryptozoology, the study of hidden animals, is often dismissed as a pseudoscience, and much of it is. Misidentified known animals, exaggerated stories, wishful thinking. But not all of it. The mountain gorilla was considered a myth until 1902. The giant squid was a sailor's tale until a specimen washed ashore in the 1870s. The okapi, the saola, the megamouth shark, all were unknown to science until recently, despite being large, real, and living in regions humans had explored for centuries. So when people in remote parts of the world describe creatures that sound like dinosaurs, should we dismiss them outright? Or should we consider the possibility that they're describing something real, something that survived, hidden, in the places we haven't fully explored? Now, let's imagine what it would have been like if the dinosaurs and the first civilization coexisted. What would that world have looked like? Picture a jungle at the edge of the world. The air is thick with moisture, heavy with the scent of rotting vegetation and blooming flowers. The canopy overhead is so dense that sunlight barely reaches the forest floor, filtering through in pale green shafts that illuminate the mist rising from the ground. The sounds are constant, the hum of insects, the calls of birds, the rustle of unseen creatures moving through the undergrowth. And then, a sound that doesn't belong. A low, rumbling bellow that vibrates through the earth, felt as much as heard. The birds fall silent. The insects stop. Even the wind seems to pause. From the shadows, something emerges. Massive, ancient. A creature with scales that shimmer in the dim light. A long neck that sways as it moves. Eyes that are dark and unreadable. It's a sauropod, one of the long-necked herbivores that once dominated the world. But this one is different. Smaller than its ancestors, adapted to the dense jungle, its body leaner, its movements more cautious. It's a survivor, the last of its kind, living in a world that has moved on without it, and watching from the edge of the clearing, hidden behind the trees, are humans. Not modern humans, but early ones. Homo erectus, perhaps, or an even earlier species. They're small, fragile compared to the creature before them, but they're intelligent. They carry tools, sharpened stones, wooden spears. They've learned to work together, to communicate, to plan. They've survived in a world filled with predators by being clever, adaptable, and cautious. They've seen creatures like this before. Not often, but enough to know they exist. Enough to tell stories about them around the fire at night. Stories of giants that walk the earth, that shake the ground with their footsteps, that can crush a human with a single careless movement. Stories that will be passed down, generation after generation, until they become myths, until they become dragons. The sauropod moves through the clearing, feeding on the high branches, unaware of the watchers. The humans don't attack, they know better. This creature is too large, too powerful. Instead, they watch, they remember, and they move on. But the encounter stays with them. It becomes part of their history, woven into the fabric of their culture. Elsewhere, in a different part of the world, another encounter. A group of early humans, more advanced, perhaps early Homo sapiens, living in a coastal region. They've built shelters, developed language, created art. They fish in the shallows, hunt in the forests, and gather plants from the hillsides. One evening, as the sun sets over the ocean, they see something in the sky. A shape, massive and dark, gliding on wings that stretch wider than any bird they've ever seen. It moves silently, effortlessly, riding the thermal currents rising from the warm water. For a moment, it passes directly overhead, and they can see the details, the leathery wings, the long beak, the reptilian body. A pterosaur, one of the last of its kind, hunting over the ocean as its ancestors did millions of years ago. The humans watch in awe and fear. They don't understand what they're seeing. They don't have words for it, but they remember. And when they return to their village, they tell the others. They describe the creature, exaggerating its size, its power, its strangeness. And the story spreads. It becomes a legend, a thunderbird, a sky serpent, a god. These encounters wouldn't have been common. The surviving dinosaurs would have been rare, isolated, living in regions where humans rarely ventured. But they would have happened, and each time they did, they would have left a mark, a story, a carving, a memory that refused to fade. But let's push the idea further. What if the coexistence wasn't just accidental encounters? What if early humans and dinosaurs interacted in more complex ways? Consider the possibility of domestication. Humans have domesticated countless species over the millennia. Dogs, horses, cattle, chickens. We've taken wild animals and through selective breeding and training, turned them into companions, workers, and food sources. What if early humans attempted to do the same with dinosaurs? It sounds absurd, but is it? Dinosaurs were reptiles, and reptiles can be trained. Crocodiles, despite their fearsome reputation, have been kept and managed by humans in various cultures. Komodo dragons, the largest living lizards, are studied and handled by researchers. If a small population of dinosaurs survived into the age of humans, and if those dinosaurs were relatively small and manageable, could early humans have learned to coexist with them, to use them? Some of the ecostones depict exactly this. Humans riding dinosaurs, controlling them, even performing surgery on them. The images are controversial, dismissed as hoaxes or fantasies. But what if they're not? What if they're depictions of something that actually happened, preserved in stone by people who wanted to record their history? Imagine a small theropod, perhaps the size of a large dog, living near a human settlement. It's a scavenger, drawn to the village by the smell of food. At first, the humans drive it away, fearing it. But over time, they realize it's not a threat. It eats the scraps they leave behind, keeps other scavengers at bay, and eventually becomes a familiar presence. The children grow up seeing it. They give it a name. They leave food for it intentionally. And slowly, over generations, it becomes part of the community. It's not domestication in the way we think of it today, but it's a relationship, a coexistence. And if such relationships existed, they would have been remembered. They would have been passed down in stories, in carvings, in myths that describe humans and monsters living side by side. Or consider the possibility of conflict. Not all encounters would have been peaceful. Some dinosaurs, even small ones, would have been predators. And early humans, despite their intelligence, were vulnerable. A pack of small theropods, hunting cooperatively, could have posed a serious threat to a human settlement. The humans would have fought back, using fire, spears, traps. And those battles would have been remembered too. They would have become legends of heroes slaying dragons, of warriors defeating monsters, of humanity triumphing over the ancient world. These stories exist in every culture. St. George and the Dragon, Beowulf and Grendel, Gilgamesh and Humbaba, Perseus and the Sea Monster. Are they pure fiction? Or are they echoes of real conflicts distorted by time, but rooted in something that actually happened? Let's turn now to the scientific perspective. Because while myths and anomalies are intriguing, they're not enough on their own. If the dinosaurs and early civilizations coexisted, there should be hard evidence, fossils, DNA, geological markers. And the absence of such evidence is the strongest argument against the idea. Paleontologists have spent over a century searching for dinosaur fossils. They've mapped the fossil record with incredible precision, identifying which species lived when and where. And the record is clear. Dinosaur fossils disappear at the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary, 65 million years ago. After that, nothing. No dinosaur bones in younger rock layers. No evidence of survival. But here's the thing. The fossil record is incomplete. Fossilization requires specific conditions: rapid burial, lack of oxygen, mineralization over millions of years. Most creatures that die don't fossilize. They decay, are scavenged, or are destroyed by geological processes. The fossils we have represent a tiny fraction of the life that once existed. So the absence of post-Cretaceous dinosaur fossils doesn't prove they didn't survive. It just means we haven't found evidence of their survival. And given how rare fossilization is, and how vast the Earth is, that's not surprising. There's also the question of where to look. Most fossil hunting happens in areas where sedimentary rock is exposed: deserts, badlands, cliffs. But what about the places we haven't explored? The deep jungles of the Amazon, the Congo, Southeast Asia. These regions are covered in dense vegetation, with soil conditions that don't favor fossilization. If dinosaurs survived in these areas, we might never find their fossils. And then there's the possibility of misidentification. What if we have found post-Cretaceous dinosaur fossils, but we didn't recognize them as such? What if we classified them as something else? An unknown reptile, a misidentified bird, a geological anomaly? The history of paleontology is filled with mistakes, reclassifications, and discoveries that overturn previous assumptions. It's possible that evidence of surviving dinosaurs is sitting in a museum somewhere, labeled incorrectly, waiting to be re-examined. Some researchers have pointed to the discovery of soft tissue in dinosaur fossils as evidence that the fossils might not be as old as we think. In 2005, Paleontologist Mary Schweitzer found what appeared to be soft, flexible tissue inside a Tyrannosaurus rex bone. The discovery was controversial, with some suggesting it meant the fossil was much younger than 65 million years. But further research showed that under certain conditions, soft tissue can be preserved for millions of years, protected by iron in the blood. The fossil was still ancient. But the discovery reminded us that fossilization is more complex than we realized, and that our assumptions about what can and can't survive over deep time are constantly being challenged. Now, let's consider the myths again, but from a different angle. What if the stories of dragons and monsters aren't memories of real dinosaurs, but something else entirely? What if they're cultural archetypes, symbols that emerge independently in different societies because they tap into something universal in the human psyche? Psychologist Carl Jung proposed the idea of the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of memories and symbols that all humans inherit. According to Jung, certain images and stories appear across cultures, not because they were passed down or experienced, but because they're hardwired into our minds. Dragons, monsters, and heroes are archetypes, representations of primal fears and desires. From this perspective, the prevalence of dragon myths doesn't require real dinosaurs. It just requires humans with imaginations, fears of predators, and a tendency to create stories that explain the unknown. A dragon could be a symbolic fusion of the most dangerous animals early humans encountered. Snakes, crocodiles, big cats, combined into a single mythical creature. But even if we accept this explanation, it doesn't fully account for the specificity of some myths. Why do Chinese dragons have scales and claws and serpentine bodies? Why do Mesoamerican feathered serpents have features that resemble theropod dinosaurs? Why do some Aboriginal Australian stories describe creatures that sound like specific dinosaur species, complete with details that match the fossil record? It's possible that these are coincidences, that human imagination, working independently across cultures, happened to create creatures that resemble dinosaurs. But it's also possible that the myths contain fragments of real memories, distorted, mythologized, but rooted in encounters that actually happened. And here's another possibility. What if the myths aren't about dinosaurs at all, but about other large reptiles that survived into the age of humans? Crocodiles, for example, have existed for over 200 million years. They lived alongside the dinosaurs and survived the mass extinction. Early humans would have encountered them, feared them, and told stories about them. Could some dragon myths be based on crocodiles, exaggerated over time into something more monstrous? The same could be true for other reptiles. Monitor lizards, pythons, anacondas, all of these are large, dangerous, and capable of inspiring fear. If early humans encountered a particularly large specimen, or if they exaggerated the size in the retelling, the creature could easily become a dragon in the cultural memory. But even this explanation has limits, because some myths describe creatures that don't match any known living reptile. Long-necked creatures, flying reptiles, creatures with features that are distinctly dinosaurian. And those myths are harder to explain away. Let's return to the idea of deep time, because one of the most challenging aspects of this question is the sheer scale of time involved, 65 million years. That's the gap between the extinction of the dinosaurs and the emergence of modern humans. To put that in perspective, if you compress the entire history of the Earth into a single year, the dinosaurs would go extinct on December 26th. Modern humans wouldn't appear until December 31st at 11:52 p.m. The gap between the two is vast, almost incomprehensible. But what if that gap isn't as absolute as it seems? What if time, on a geological scale, is more fluid than we realize? What if the boundaries between eras are softer, more permeable, with overlaps and echoes that we're only beginning to understand? Consider the concept of evolutionary lag. When a mass extinction occurs, it doesn't happen instantly everywhere. Some regions are affected more than others. Some species survive longer in isolated pockets, clinging to existence in refugia, safe havens where conditions remain stable. Over time, these populations dwindle and eventually disappear, but the process can take thousands, even millions of years. What if some dinosaurs survived the initial extinction event and persisted in refugia for millions of years afterward? Not thriving, but surviving, slowly declining, adapting to a changing world until they finally vanished, or until they encountered something new. And what if humanity's timeline is more complex than we think? What if there were earlier hominids, or even earlier intelligent species that we haven't discovered yet? What if the fossil record of human evolution is incomplete, with gaps that hide entire branches of our family tree? The more we learn about human evolution, the more complicated it becomes. New species are discovered regularly. Homo naledi, found in South Africa, lived as recently as 300,000 years ago, but had features that seemed much more primitive. Homo floresiensis, the hobbit species, survived on an Indonesian island until 50,000 years ago, long after modern humans had spread across the world. Denisovans, known only from a handful of bone fragments and DNA, interbred with modern humans and left genetic traces that persist today. Each of these discoveries challenges our understanding of what it means to be human and when humanity truly began. And each one opens the door to the possibility that our history is deeper, stranger, and more interconnected than we ever imagined. What if, in that deep history, there were moments when the old world and the new world touched? When the last dinosaurs and the first humans shared the same Earth, however briefly? When the age of giants and the age of intelligence overlapped, creating encounters that would be remembered, distorted, and passed down through the ages as myths? Let's explore one final possibility. What if the coexistence wasn't physical, but temporal? What if the dinosaurs and early civilizations didn't share the same time, but their legacies intersected in ways we don't fully understand? Consider the fossil record itself. When early humans first encountered dinosaur fossils, what did they think they were seeing? They didn't have the concept of extinction. They didn't understand deep time or evolution. When they found massive bones embedded in rock, they would have assumed they belonged to creatures that still existed somewhere, or that had existed recently. In ancient Greece, fossils of mammoths and other Ice Age megafauna were interpreted as the remains of giants and heroes from mythology. The skulls of dwarf elephants, with their large central nasal cavity, may have inspired the myth of the Cyclops. In China, as we've discussed, dinosaur fossils were called dragon bones and incorporated into traditional medicine and mythology. So when early humans found dinosaur fossils, they would have created stories to explain them. Stories of dragons, of monsters, of ancient battles between gods and beasts. These stories would have been passed down, embellished, and eventually become indistinguishable from myths about real creatures. In this sense, the dinosaurs and early civilizations did coexist, not in physical space, but in the cultural imagination. The fossils were the bridge, the physical evidence that inspired the myths. And those myths, in turn, shaped how humans understood the world and their place in it. But there's another layer to this. What if some of those fossils were more recent than we think? What if early humans found fossils of dinosaurs that had died only thousands of years earlier rather than millions? What if the extinction wasn't a single event, but a long, drawn-out process, with the last dinosaur surviving into the age of humans? This is where the evidence becomes murky, because if such fossils existed, they would be almost impossible to distinguish from older ones. Fossilization doesn't come with a timestamp. Dating methods like radiometric dating work on the rock surrounding the fossil, not the fossil itself. And if a dinosaur died 50,000 years ago in a region where the rock is millions of years old, the fossil would be dated to the age of the rock, not the age of the creature. So it's possible, just possible, that some of the dinosaur fossils we've found are younger than we think, that they represent the last survivors of a dying lineage, creatures that persisted long after their kin had vanished. And if early humans encountered those fossils, or even the living creatures themselves, the line between myth and reality would blur in ways we can barely imagine. But let's not end there, because there's another dimension to this mystery that we haven't fully explored, a dimension that takes us beyond the fossils and the myths, into the realm of ecology, geography, and the hidden corners of the earth where the rules we take for granted might not apply. We need to talk about islands. Islands are strange places. They're laboratories of evolution, isolated worlds where life takes unexpected turns. On islands, the normal rules of size and survival get rewritten. Large animals become small, a phenomenon called insular dwarfism. Small animals become large, insular gigantism. Species that would never survive on the mainland thrive in isolation, and creatures that have vanished everywhere else persist, unchanged, as if the island exists in a different time stream. Consider the Galapagos Islands, where Darwin first glimpsed the mechanics of evolution. Giant tortoises, found nowhere else on Earth. Marine iguanas that swim in the ocean, despite being reptiles. Flightless cormorants that lost the ability to fly because they didn't need it. Each island in the archipelago has its own unique species, variations on a theme shaped by isolation and time. Or consider Madagascar, an island that broke away from the African continent over 80 million years ago, while the dinosaurs still ruled the earth. When Madagascar separated, it carried with it a cargo of life, and that life evolved in isolation for millions of years. Today, 90% of Madagascar's species are found nowhere else. Lemurs, fossors, chameleons that look like miniature dragons. It's a world unto itself, a fragment of the past preserved in the present. Now, here's the crucial question. If Madagascar could preserve unique lineages for 80 million years, could other islands have preserved dinosaurs? Think about the thousands of islands scattered across the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, the Caribbean. Many of them are remote, rarely visited by humans even today. Some have never been fully explored. Their interiors are dense jungle, their coastlines ringed with cliffs and reefs that make landing difficult. If a population of dinosaurs survived the mass extinction and found refuge on one of these islands, they could have persisted for millions of years, evolving in isolation, adapting to their new environment. They would have changed, of course. Evolution doesn't stop. Isolated populations adapt to their surroundings, often in dramatic ways. A large theropod might become smaller on an island with limited prey. A sauropod might develop shorter legs for navigating dense forest. A pterosaur might lose the ability to fly, like the dodo or the kakapo, if there were no predators to escape from. These creatures wouldn't look exactly like their Cretaceous ancestors, but they would still be dinosaurs. And if early humans reached those islands, they would have encountered them. There's precedent for this. Until recently, geologically speaking, islands around the world harbored megafauna that survived nowhere else. Dwarf elephants lived on Mediterranean islands until about 4,000 years ago. Giant ground sloths persisted on Caribbean islands until humans arrived. The moa, a massive flightless bird, thrived in New Zealand until the Maori hunted it to extinction around 600 years ago. Each of these creatures was a relic, a survivor from an earlier age, living on borrowed time in an isolated refuge. So, why not dinosaurs? Why not a small population of theropods on a remote Pacific island, surviving until a few thousand years ago? Why not pterosaurs on an island in the Indian Ocean, glimpsed by sailors and remembered as giant birds or flying demons? The oceans are vast, and the number of unexplored islands is larger than most people realize. And then there's the question of underwater refugia. We've focused on land, on jungles and islands and mountains. But what about the oceans? 70% of the Earth's surface is covered by water, and we've explored less than 5% of the ocean floor. The deep sea is the largest habitat on Earth, and it's almost entirely unknown to us. New species are discovered there regularly: bizarre fish, giant squid, creatures that seem to belong to alien worlds. Could aquatic or semi-aquatic dinosaurs have survived in the oceans? We know that many dinosaurs were comfortable in water. Spinosaurus, recently discovered to have been semi-aquatic, had adaptations for swimming: dense bones, a paddle-like tail, nostrils positioned high on its skull. Plesiosaurs and mosasaurs, though technically not dinosaurs, were marine reptiles that thrived in the oceans alongside the dinosaurs. When the asteroid struck, the oceans were devastated, but they weren't sterilized. Life persisted in the deep water, in the abyssal zones where sunlight never reaches. What if some of those marine reptiles survived? What if they adapted to the deep ocean, becoming smaller, more efficient, dwelling in the places where humans couldn't follow? We discover new species of deep-sea creatures every year. In 2021, scientists found a new species of whale. A whale, one of the largest animals on Earth, that had gone unnoticed until then. If we can miss a whale, what else might be down there? There are stories scattered across maritime cultures of sea serpents and marine monsters. The Leviathan of the Bible, the Kraken of Norse mythology, the Loch Ness Monster in Scotland, the Ogopogo in Canada. Most of these can be explained as misidentifications. Large eels, sturgeon, floating logs, waves. But some descriptions are oddly specific. Long necks, humped backs, reptilian heads. They sound like plesiosaurs. In 1977, a Japanese fishing trawler off the coast of New Zealand hauled up a rotting carcass from the deep ocean. It was large, partially decomposed, with a long neck and 4 flippers. The crew took photographs and measurements before throwing it back. It smelled too terrible to keep aboard. The photographs sparked excitement. Could this be a plesiosaur? Had they discovered a living dinosaur? Analysis of the tissue samples eventually identified it as a basking shark, decomposed in a way that made it look plesiosaur-like. But the incident revealed something important. The deep ocean could hide large, unknown creatures. And if the ocean could hide a rotting shark that looked like a plesiosaur, could it hide a living plesiosaur that looked like a plesiosaur? Probably not. The evidence doesn't support it. But the possibility lingers, hovering at the edge of the known world, in the same place where maps once said, "Here be dragons." Let's turn now to another question. What do indigenous peoples say? For most of history, Western science dismissed indigenous knowledge as superstition, as folklore not worthy of serious consideration. But in recent decades, that attitude has shifted. Scientists have begun to recognize that indigenous peoples, who have lived in their environments for thousands of years, possess deep knowledge about the natural world. Knowledge that Western science is only beginning to rediscover. There are countless examples. Indigenous Australians used controlled burning to manage landscapes, a practice that scientists now recognize as essential for preventing catastrophic wildfires. Amazonian peoples cultivated forests in ways that increased biodiversity, creating what looked like wilderness, but was actually carefully managed ecosystem. Polynesian navigators crossed thousands of miles of open ocean using knowledge of stars, currents, and bird behavior that modern sailors struggle to replicate. So when indigenous peoples tell stories about large reptilian creatures that their ancestors encountered, should we dismiss those stories, or should we listen? In the Congo Basin, the Mokele-mbembe is not a myth in the way Westerners use the word. It's a creature that the Lingala people describe with the same matter-of-fact tone they use for elephants or crocodiles. They call it the one who stops the flow of rivers. They describe it as larger than an elephant, with a long neck and tail, brownish-grey in color, living in deep water holes in the most remote swamps. They say it's rare, shy, and dangerous if provoked. Western expeditions have searched for the Mokele-mbembe since the early 20th century. None have found conclusive evidence, but the expeditions themselves reveal something interesting. The Congo Basin is vast, dense, and incredibly difficult to navigate. There are regions where no Westerner has ever set foot, where the forest is so thick that satellite imagery can't penetrate it. If an unknown large animal lived there, remaining hidden would not be difficult. The local people don't claim to see the creature often. They say it's rare, that sightings happen once in a generation, in specific locations. They tell of canoes that ventured too close and were overturned. They describe tracks found in the mud near waterholes, circular and massive, unlike any known animal. They speak with the certainty of people describing something real, not something imagined. Are they describing a dinosaur? A sauropod that somehow survived? Probably not. The more likely explanations are misidentification of known animals, elephants swimming with their trunks up, hippos seen from unusual angles, crocodiles exaggerated in the retelling. But the consistency of the descriptions across different tribes and regions is striking, and it raises a question. What if some of these stories are based on real encounters with animals we don't know about yet? Not dinosaurs necessarily, but something unusual. Something that deserves investigation rather than dismissal. The same pattern appears in Papua New Guinea, where multiple tribes describe the ropen, a flying creature with leathery wings, a long tail, and a beak filled with teeth. They say it flies at night, glowing faintly, hunting for food near the coast. Western investigators have documented dozens of sightings, taken testimony from witnesses, and even captured strange lights on video. Lights that move through the sky in ways that don't match aircraft, birds, or any known phenomenon. Is it a pterosaur? Almost certainly not. The more likely explanations are large bats, flying foxes, or birds seen in poor lighting and misidentified. The glowing lights could be bioluminescent insects, or reflections, or something else entirely. But the witnesses are adamant. They know bats. They know birds. What they're describing is different, larger, stranger. And here's what makes these stories significant. Indigenous knowledge has proven reliable before. When Western scientists finally studied the Komodo dragon in the early 20th century, they were following up on local Indonesian stories about giant lizards that seemed too fantastical to be true. Those stories turned out to be accurate. The Komodo dragon was real. A massive predatory lizard that could take down a water buffalo. When scientists discovered the mountain gorilla in 1902, they were investigating African stories about giant apes that lived in the mountains. Those stories too were true. The gorilla was real, living in remote highlands where Europeans had never explored. So when indigenous peoples tell stories about unknown creatures, history suggests we should at least investigate before dismissing them. Not with credulity, but with open-minded skepticism. Because sometimes the stories turn out to be true. Now let's consider something even stranger. What if some of the evidence for coexistence is hiding in plain sight, but we're interpreting it wrong? Archaeology is a science of interpretation. We dig up artifacts, pottery, tools, bones, structures, and we interpret what they mean. But interpretation requires context, assumptions, and frameworks. When we find something that doesn't fit our framework, we often reinterpret it to make it fit, rather than questioning the framework itself. Consider the Nazca lines in Peru. Massive geoglyphs carved into the desert, depicting animals, geometric shapes, and strange figures. Some of the animal figures are recognizable. Monkeys, spiders, hummingbirds. But others are harder to identify. There are figures with long necks, small heads, and bodies that don't match any known animal in the region. Mainstream archaeology interprets these as stylized or symbolic representations, or as depictions of animals from other regions that the Nazca people encountered through trade. But what if they're literal representations? What if the Nazca people were drawing what they saw, and what they saw included creatures that don't exist in modern South America? The same question applies to the geoglyphs and petroglyphs found across the American Southwest, Australia, and other regions. Some depict animals that are clearly extinct megafauna, mammoths, giant ground sloths, species that we know coexisted with early humans. But others depict creatures that don't match anything in the known fossil record. Long-bodied reptiles, creatures with features that seem dinosaurian. Are these imaginative creations, spiritual symbols, or are they depictions of real animals, animals that survived in small populations, encountered rarely, but remembered vividly enough to be carved into stone. The challenge is that we can't know for certain. The artists are gone. The cultures have changed. The oral traditions that would have explained the images have been disrupted or lost. What remains are the images themselves, open to interpretation, each generation of scholars projecting their own assumptions onto the ancient stone. But here's a thought experiment. Imagine that 1,000 years from now, archaeologists excavate the ruins of our civilization. They find comic books depicting superheroes, movies showing dragons and dinosaurs, children's toys shaped like fantastic creatures. If they don't have the context to understand that these are fictional, they might conclude that we believe these creatures were real. Or worse, they might misinterpret them entirely, creating elaborate theories about our culture that are completely wrong. Now flip it around. When we look at ancient art depicting strange creatures, are we making the same mistake? Are we imposing our assumptions that the artists were creating mythology, not documenting reality, when the truth might be more complex? It's worth noting that ancient art sometimes depicts animals we know were real, but in ways that seem fantastical. Medieval European art shows elephants drawn by artists who had never seen one, working only from descriptions. The elephants look bizarre, almost mythical, but they're based on real animals. Similarly, ancient Roman mosaics depict creatures from Africa that seem exaggerated or impossible, but they're often accurate representations of animals like hippos or rhinoceroses, seen through the lens of artistic convention. So when we see ancient art depicting dinosaur-like creatures, we're faced with a puzzle. Are they imaginative creations? Are they misinterpretations of known animals? Are they symbolic representations of cultural concepts? Or are they, in some cases, depictions of real encounters with animals we don't know about? The honest answer is, we don't know. And that uncertainty is important. It's a reminder that our interpretations of the past are always provisional, always subject to revision as new evidence emerges. Let's zoom out now and consider the bigger picture. The question of whether dinosaurs and early civilizations coexisted is really a question about how we understand time, extinction, and the completeness of our knowledge. Modern science operates on a principle called uniformitarianism, the idea that the processes we observe today have been operating throughout Earth's history. Rivers erode rock slowly, species evolve gradually, continents drift at a steady pace. This principle has been incredibly useful. It's allowed us to reconstruct the past using the present as a guide. But uniformitarianism has limits. It assumes that the past looked roughly like the present, just extended backward in time. It doesn't account well for rare events, anomalies, or circumstances that no longer exist. The asteroid that killed the dinosaurs was not a uniform process. It was a catastrophic, singular event. And if one such event can reshape the entire planet, what other rare events might have occurred that we haven't yet discovered? There's also the problem of the present being an imperfect guide to the past. The Earth today is in an unusual state. We're in an interglacial period, a relatively warm phase within an ice age. For most of the past 2 million years, the climate has been colder, with massive ice sheets covering much of North America and Europe. And for most of Earth's history before that, the planet was warmer, with no polar ice caps at all. So when we try to understand what life was like in the past, We can't simply extrapolate from the present. We have to imagine conditions that are radically different. Different climates, different sea levels, different ecosystems. And in those different conditions, different kinds of survival might have been possible. Consider the refugia hypothesis. During the last ice age, many species survived in small, isolated pockets, refugia, where conditions remained stable even as the surrounding environment became inhospitable. When the ice retreated, these populations expanded outward, recolonizing the landscape. We know this happened with trees, with mammals, with birds. It's one of the fundamental processes of how life responds to climate change. Now apply that to the dinosaurs. What if the asteroid impact created a global catastrophe, but not a uniform one? What if some regions, isolated islands, deep valleys, areas shielded by geography or climate, escaped the worst of the devastation? What if small populations of dinosaurs survived in these refugia, persisting for thousands or even millions of years after the main extinction event? This isn't pure speculation. We know that extinctions are rarely absolute. After every mass extinction in Earth's history, some species survive. The survivors are often small, adaptable, and capable of living in a wide range of conditions, but not always. Sometimes large animals survive too, if they're in the right place at the right time. During the Permian extinction, the worst mass extinction in Earth's history, over 90% of all species died, but some survived. And within a few million years, the planet was teeming with life again. The survivors inherited the Earth, diversified, and filled the empty ecological niches left by the extinct species. Could some dinosaurs have done the same after the end Cretaceous extinction? Could they have survived in small numbers, in isolated locations, while mammals spread and diversified around them? And could they have persisted, perhaps in ever-dwindling numbers, until they finally encountered the one species that would remember them? Humans. There's one more angle we need to explore: the role of oral tradition and the persistence of memory across deep time. Human memory is fragile. Individual memories fade, distort, and disappear. But cultural memory, stories passed down through generations, can persist for astonishing lengths of time. Recent research has shown that some indigenous Australian oral traditions accurately describe events that happened over 10,000 years ago. One example: Aboriginal stories from the Australian coast describe a time when the sea level was lower, when you could walk to islands that are now separated by water. Geological evidence confirms that sea levels were indeed lower during the last ice age, which ended about 12,000 years ago. The oral traditions remembered this, passing the knowledge down through hundreds of generations, even though the people telling the stories had never seen the coastline the way their ancestors described it. Another example: Aboriginal stories from Tasmania describe giant animals, megafauna like the diprotodon, a marsupial the size of a rhinoceros, that went extinct around 40,000 years ago. The stories describe these animals with enough detail that scientists can identify which species they're referring to. This means the stories have been preserved for 40,000 years. 40,000 years. That's 400 generations of people, each passing the story to the next, keeping the memory alive across a span of time that's almost incomprehensible. If oral tradition can preserve memories for 40,000 years, could it preserve them for longer? Could stories about encounters with large reptiles, creatures unlike anything in the modern world? Be memories from even deeper in the past? Could they be echoes of encounters that happened hundreds of thousands of years ago, when earlier hominids encountered the last surviving dinosaurs? It sounds impossible, but consider the alternative, that every culture on Earth independently invented stories about dragons, serpents, and giant reptiles, and that these stories just happen to resemble dinosaurs by coincidence, which is more likely. That human imagination is so consistent across cultures that it independently creates the same mythical creatures everywhere, or that the stories are based on something real, something encountered long ago and remembered imperfectly. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Some dragon myths are surely pure invention, cultural archetypes that emerge from the human psyche, but others might contain fragments of real memory, distorted and mythologized, but rooted in actual encounters. The challenge is figuring out which is which. As we approach the end of this exploration, let's confront the elephant in the room. Why does this question matter? Why spend time speculating about something so unlikely, so unsupported by mainstream science? Why entertain the possibility that dinosaurs and humans coexisted when the evidence is so thin? The answer is not that we should abandon scientific rigor or accept wild theories without evidence. The answer is that questions like this remind us of the limits of our knowledge. They keep us humble. They keep us curious. They prevent us from becoming so certain in our understanding of the past that we stop looking for new evidence, new perspectives, new possibilities. Science progresses not by defending established ideas, but by challenging them. Every major breakthrough in our understanding of the past has come from someone questioning the accepted timeline, the accepted interpretation, the accepted framework. Continental drift was once considered absurd. The idea that an asteroid killed the dinosaurs was ridiculed when it was first proposed. The discovery of the Higgs boson required building the largest machine ever constructed because scientists refused to accept that their theories were complete. So when we ask whether dinosaurs and early civilizations coexisted, we're not really asking whether we should believe in dragons. We're asking whether we should remain open to the possibility that the past is stranger than we think, that the timeline we've constructed might have gaps, overlaps, and anomalies that we haven't fully understood, that the myths and legends passed down through countless generations might contain fragments of truth worth investigating. We're also acknowledging something profound, that the earth is vast, deep, and ancient beyond our comprehension, that life is resilient, adaptable, and capable of surviving in conditions we can barely imagine, that extinction is a process, not an event, and that the boundaries between one age and another are never as clean as we draw them in our textbooks. Most importantly, we're celebrating wonder. Because at its core, this question is about refusing to let the past become mundane. It's about looking at dinosaur fossils and seeing not just bones but mysteries. It's about looking at ancient myths and asking not just what did they mean, but what did they see. It's about recognizing that the story of life on Earth is still being written, that new chapters are discovered every year, and that we're incredibly fortunate to live in a time when we can ask these questions at all. So where does that leave us? With no definitive answers, certainly. The evidence for coexistence between dinosaurs and early humans is circumstantial at best. non-existent at worst. The scientific consensus remains clear. The dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago, and humanity emerged long after. And that sometimes the most valuable questions are not the ones we answer, but the ones we keep asking. Because in asking, we honor the vastness of time. We honor the resilience of life. We honor the courage of our ancestors who looked at the world around them and tried to make sense of it, creating stories that have echoed across millennia. And we honor the dinosaurs themselves, those magnificent creatures who ruled the earth for longer than we can truly comprehend, who died in fire and darkness, and who left behind not just bones but questions. Questions that refuse to fade. Questions that connect us to the deepest past and remind us that the Earth story is far stranger, far more wonderful than any myth we could invent. Sleep now and let those questions dream through you. Let them carry you to the edge of the known world, where maps end and mysteries begin, where the age of giants might still linger, hidden in the shadows, waiting to be remembered. And when you wake, carry that sense of wonder with you, because the world is still full of mysteries. The past is still being discovered, and somewhere, perhaps, in a place we haven't looked yet, a fragment of that ancient world survives. Not likely, but possible. And possibility, after all, is where all great discoveries begin. There's another realm we need to explore, one that exists beneath our feet, hidden in darkness, preserved in places where time moves differently. We need to talk about caves. Caves are time capsules. They're sealed environments where temperature remains constant, where humidity is controlled, where the outside world's chaos doesn't penetrate. In caves, things are preserved that would decay anywhere else. Ice Age cave paintings in France look as vivid today as they did 17,000 years ago. Footprints pressed into cave mud have survived for tens of thousands of years, so detailed you can see the individual toes of the humans who left them. DNA has been extracted from cave sediments, revealing the presence of animals that walked through them hundreds of thousands of years ago. Caves are also sanctuaries. Throughout human history, people have retreated into caves for shelter, for ceremony, for survival. And in doing so, they left records, not just of themselves, but of what they saw, the animals they hunted, the creatures they feared, the world as they experienced it. When we look at Paleolithic cave art, we see a bestiary of Ice Age Europe, mammoths with their curved tusks and shaggy fur, cave lions prowling through the darkness, woolly rhinoceroses, bison, horses, reindeer. These paintings are so accurate that paleontologists can identify not just the species, but sometimes even the sex and age of the animals depicted. The artists were careful observers, people who knew these animals intimately because their survival depended on it. But among the recognizable animals, there are others, strange creatures that don't match anything we know. Long-necked beings with small heads, creatures with features that seem reptilian rather than mammalian, serpentine forms that wind across cave walls, too large and too specific to be mere decoration. In the Chauvet cave in France, among the lions and mammoths, there's a panel that has puzzled researchers. It shows a creature with a long, curved neck, a small head, and a bulky body. The posture is unlike any Ice Age mammal. Some have suggested it's a stylized mammoth, seen from an unusual angle. Others argue it's a purely symbolic representation, perhaps a shamanic vision rather than a real animal. But what if it's neither? What if the artist was drawing something they had actually seen? Something that doesn't fit our understanding of what lived in Ice Age Europe. Cave art isn't the only record. In some caves, there are markings that seem to represent tracks or footprints. 3-toed prints carved into stone, preserved alongside human handprints. In others, there are carvings of creatures that look distinctly reptilian, with scales and tails and proportions that don't match any known Ice Age fauna. These anomalies are usually dismissed as artistic license, as symbolic representations, as mistakes in perspective or proportion. And in most cases, that's probably correct. But consider this. If early humans did encounter surviving dinosaurs, even rarely, caves would be exactly where we'd expect to find evidence. Because caves are where humans recorded their world. And caves are where records survive. There's another dimension to caves that's rarely discussed. They're not just surface features. They're entry points into vast underground systems, networks of passages that extend for miles, connecting regions that seem separate on the surface. Some of these cave systems are so large, so complex, that they create their own ecosystems. Underground rivers, lightless lakes, chambers the size of cathedrals. And in these underground realms, life persists in forms that seem alien. Blind fish, translucent salamanders, insects that have evolved without eyes, navigating by touch and chemical signals. These creatures have been isolated from the surface world for millions of years, evolving in darkness, adapting to conditions that would kill most surface-dwelling species. If life can survive and evolve in the deep underground for millions of years, could larger creatures do the same? Could a population of small dinosaurs have found refuge in cave systems after the asteroid impact, surviving in the darkness, feeding on underground ecosystems, slowly adapting until they became something new, something we wouldn't recognize even if we found them? It sounds like science fiction, but consider the olm, a salamander that lives in the caves of southeastern Europe. It can survive without food for 10 years. It lives for a century. It's evolved to thrive in total darkness, in cold water, in an environment that seems completely hostile to complex life. If a salamander can do this, what else might be possible? In 1986, scientists exploring the Movil Cave in Romania discovered an entire ecosystem that had been sealed off from the surface for 5.5 million years. The cave had its own atmosphere, different from the outside world, and it was full of life. 48 species that existed nowhere else on Earth. All of them adapted to the cave's unique conditions: spiders, scorpions, centipedes, creatures that had evolved in isolation, cut off from sunlight, from fresh air, from everything we consider necessary for life. If an ecosystem can survive sealed in a cave for 5.5 million years, what else might be hiding in the unexplored cave systems of the world? The Earth is honeycombed with caves, many of them never mapped, never explored. In China, new cave systems are discovered regularly, some of them containing rivers, forests, entire valleys hidden beneath the surface. In Southeast Asia, in South America, in Africa, everywhere humans have looked carefully, we've found caves we never knew existed. And in those caves, occasionally, we find things that don't make sense. Bones that don't match known species. Footprints that seem impossibly large. Stories from locals about creatures that emerge from caves at night. Creatures that don't match anything in the scientific literature. Are these dinosaurs? Almost certainly not. but they're reminders that the underground world is vast, largely unexplored, and capable of preserving life in ways we're only beginning to understand. Now, let's travel to the opposite extreme, to the coldest, most inhospitable places on Earth. Let's talk about the polar regions. When we think about where dinosaurs might have survived, we don't usually think about the Arctic or Antarctic. These are frozen wastelands, places where nothing large can survive for long. But this is a modern perspective. For most of Earth's history, the poles weren't frozen. They were temperate, even warm, covered with forests and teeming with life. During the age of the dinosaurs, the Arctic was home to diverse ecosystems. Polar dinosaurs lived there, hadrosaurs, ceratopsians, even tyrannosaurs. They adapted to the long polar nights, the seasonal variations in food availability, the unique challenges of life near the top of the world. We know this because we've found their fossils there, preserved in rocks that formed millions of years ago when the climate was different. But here's what's interesting. The poles didn't freeze overnight. The transition from warm to cold took millions of years. And during that transition, as the climate cooled gradually, the dinosaurs living there would have had to adapt or migrate. Most probably migrated, moving toward the equator as their habitats became uninhabitable. But what if some stayed? What if they adapted? We know that animals can adapt to cold. Mammals did it, developing fur, increasing their body size, changing their metabolism. Birds did it, developing insulation, behavioral adaptations, physiological changes that allowed them to survive in extreme cold. Dinosaurs were more closely related to birds than to mammals. Many of them had feathers. Some were likely warm-blooded, or at least had elevated metabolisms that allowed them to regulate their body temperature. So it's not impossible that some polar dinosaurs adapted to the cooling climate, developing insulation, changing their behavior, finding ways to survive as the world around them transformed. And if they did, they would have been ideally positioned to survive the asteroid impact, because the poles, paradoxically, might have been sheltered from the worst effects of the extinction. The asteroid struck near the equator. The immediate devastation, the shockwave, the heat, the firestorms, would have been most intense in equatorial and mid-latitude regions. The poles, being farther from the impact site, would have experienced less immediate destruction. Yes, the global effects, the dust cloud, the darkness, the cooling, would have reached everywhere, but the initial catastrophe would have been less severe at high latitudes. And if a population of cold-adapted dinosaurs was living near the poles when the impact occurred, they might have had a better chance of survival than their tropical cousins. They were already adapted to darkness. The polar night lasts for months. They were already adapted to cold. They were already adapted to surviving on limited resources during the winter months. Could they have survived the years of darkness and cold that followed the impact? It's a stretch. The extinction was global, devastating, thorough. But survival in extreme conditions is what life does. It's what life has always done. And the poles have proven time and again to be places where life persists against all odds. Consider the Antarctic icefish, which has antifreeze proteins in its blood that allow it to survive in water cold enough to freeze most other fish. Consider the Arctic ground squirrel, which can survive body temperatures below freezing, its heart barely beating, its body in a state of suspended animation for months at a time. Consider the tardigrades, microscopic animals that can survive in the vacuum of space, in boiling water, in absolute zero, in conditions that would annihilate almost any other form of life. Life finds a way. It's a cliché, but it's true. And if life can find a way in the modern polar regions, which are far harsher than they were during the age of the dinosaurs, then maybe, just maybe, some dinosaurs found a way too. There's another consideration. The poles are largely unexplored. Antarctica is covered by ice sheets up to 3 miles thick. Beneath that ice are mountains, valleys, lakes, entire landscapes that haven't been exposed to the surface in millions of years. Lake Vostok, buried beneath 2 miles of ice, has been isolated from the rest of the world for 20 million years. When scientists finally drilled into it, they found evidence of life, bacteria, possibly other organisms, surviving in complete darkness, in water that's been sealed away since before modern humans evolved. If life can survive beneath Antarctic ice for 20 million years, what else might be down there? Could there be frozen remains of creatures that survived long after the main extinction? Could there even be living organisms preserved in a state of suspended animation, waiting for conditions to change? It's speculative, wildly speculative, but it's not impossible. And as the polar ice melts, as it's melting now due to climate change, we're beginning to see what's been hidden beneath. Every year, new fossils are exposed, new landscapes are revealed, and occasionally, something unexpected emerges. In Siberia, melting permafrost regularly exposes the frozen remains of Ice Age animals, mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, cave lions. These animals are so well preserved that their flesh, their fur, their internal organs are still intact. Scientists have extracted viable DNA from them, even cloned cells from a mammoth that died 40,000 years ago. If Ice Age mammals can be preserved in permafrost for 40,000 years, could older remains be preserved in deeper, older layers of frozen ground? Could there be dinosaur remains, or remains of creatures that lived after the dinosaurs, frozen in permafrost that's millions of years old, waiting to be discovered? The Arctic, like Antarctica, is changing rapidly. The ice is melting, the permafrost is thawing, and as it does, the ancient past is being revealed. What we'll find there in the coming decades could rewrite our understanding of extinction, survival, and the boundaries between geological ages. Let's shift our focus now to something more subtle, more hidden, but potentially more revealing than any fossil or cave painting. Genetics. DNA is a record of the past. Every living organism carries within its cells a genetic archive, a history of its ancestors, of the species that came before it, of the evolutionary journey that led to its existence. And hidden within that archive are sometimes surprises, sequences that don't quite make sense, genes that seem to come from nowhere, echoes of ancestral connections that challenge our understanding of how life evolved. In recent years, scientists have discovered what they call ghost lineages in the genetic record. These are species that left no fossils, or whose fossils we haven't found, but whose existence can be inferred from the DNA of living organisms. They're gaps in the fossil record filled in by genetics, proof that species existed even when we have no physical evidence of them. One famous example, the Denisovans. Until 2010, we had no idea this species of archaic humans existed. Then scientists extracted DNA from a tiny finger bone found in a Siberian cave. the DNA revealed a completely unknown human lineage, one that had interbred with both Neanderthals and modern humans, leaving genetic traces that persist in living people today. The Denisovans are a ghost lineage made real by genetics, and they raise a provocative question. How many other ghost lineages are out there? How many species existed, left their genetic mark, but left no fossils we've yet discovered? Now apply this to dinosaurs. We know that birds are living dinosaurs, direct descendants of theropod dinosaurs that survived the extinction. Every pigeon, every sparrow, every eagle carries dinosaur DNA. But could there be other genetic traces? Could there be evidence hidden in the genomes of living reptiles or even mammals of interactions with dinosaurs that occurred much later than we think? It sounds absurd. DNA degrades over time. After a few million years, it's usually gone entirely, broken down into fragments too small to analyze. The oldest DNA ever recovered is about 1 million years old, extracted from mammoth teeth preserved in permafrost. Dinosaur DNA from 65 million years ago is almost certainly beyond recovery, but genetic traces can persist in other ways. Viruses, for instance, can insert themselves into the DNA of their hosts. These viral sequences become part of the genome, passed down through generations. Scientists have found ancient viral DNA in the human genome, sequences that infected our ancestors millions of years ago and have been inherited ever since. If a virus infected both dinosaurs and early mammals, it could have left traces in both lineages. If scientists found the same viral sequence in both bird DNA, the dinosaur descendants, and in the DNA of ancient mammals that coexisted with dinosaurs, it would suggest they shared a disease environment. But what if they found such sequences in mammals that supposedly evolved after the dinosaurs were gone? What would that suggest? This is highly speculative, and genetic research hasn't found anything like this. But it illustrates a point. Genetics can reveal connections that fossils can't. It can show interactions between species that left no other trace. And as our ability to sequence and analyze ancient DNA improves, we might find surprises that challenge the neat divisions we've drawn between geological ages. There's another genetic mystery worth considering: the anomalies. Sometimes scientists find genes in modern organisms that seem to have no evolutionary precedent, no clear ancestral source. These genes are rare, and they're usually explained as the result of horizontal gene transfer, genes jumping between unrelated species through viruses or other mechanisms, or as genes that evolved rapidly in response to environmental pressures. But occasionally, there are genes that don't fit these explanations, genes that seem older than they should be, or that have characteristics suggesting they came from a lineage we thought was extinct. These anomalies are often dismissed as errors, contamination, or misinterpretation. But what if some of them are real? What if they're echoes of connections we don't yet understand? The genetic record is vast and complex, and we're only beginning to read it. The human genome alone contains 3 billion base pairs. The genomes of other organisms are similarly massive. Within that vast library of genetic information, there could be chapters we haven't yet discovered. Chapters that tell stories about the past that no fossil can reveal. Let's explore one more angle, one that takes us into the realm of ecology and the interconnected web of life. The idea that evidence of coexistence might exist not in the large, obvious forms, fossils, bones, artifacts, but in the small, overlooked details of ecosystems. Every species is part of a web. It has predators, prey, parasites, symbionts. It interacts with plants, with other animals, with microorganisms. When a species goes extinct, it leaves a hole in the web. Other species adapt to fill that hole, but the adaptation takes time, and sometimes the adaptations themselves are evidence of what was lost. Consider parasites. Many parasites are highly specific. They evolve to infect a particular host species and can't survive without it. When the host goes extinct, the parasite usually goes extinct too. But sometimes, the parasite survives by switching to a new host, a species similar enough to the original that the parasite can adapt. Now, here's the interesting part. Sometimes we find parasites in modern animals that seem too specialized, too complex, to have evolved recently. They have life cycles that require multiple host species, elaborate mechanisms for infection, adaptations that suggest a long evolutionary history. But when we try to trace that history, we find gaps. The parasite seems adapted for a host that doesn't exist anymore. What if some of these orphaned parasites are relics of species that survived longer than we think? What if they originally evolved to infect dinosaurs, then switched to new hosts, mammals, reptiles, birds, as their original host dwindled and disappeared? The parasites themselves would carry evidence of those ancient relationships, encoded in their biology, in their life cycles, in their adaptations. This is speculative, and parasitology hasn't uncovered clear evidence of this. But it's a reminder that extinction doesn't just affect the species that die, it affects everything connected to them. And those connections can persist, sometimes in unexpected ways. The same logic applies to plants. Many plants have evolved specific relationships with animals, pollinators, seed dispersers, herbivores. Some of these relationships are so specific that the plant can't survive without the animal, and vice versa. When the animal goes extinct, the plant often follows. But sometimes, we find plants with adaptations that don't make sense in the modern world. Fruits that are too large for any living animal to eat. Flowers structured for pollinators that don't seem to exist. Defense mechanisms, thorns, toxins, tough leaves that seem excessive for the herbivores they currently face. In Central and South America, there are trees that produce enormous fruits. Fruits so large that no living animal can swallow them whole. The trees seem to rely on seed dispersers that don't exist anymore. Scientists have suggested that these trees evolved their fruits for the megafauna of the Ice Age. Giant ground sloths, gomphotheres, other massive herbivores that went extinct 10,000 years ago. Without those dispersers, the trees are struggling, relying on gravity and luck to spread their seeds. But what if some plant adaptations are even older? What if some defensive structures, some fruits, some symbiotic relationships evolved in response to herbivores that lived much earlier? Herbivores like dinosaurs. Plants have incredibly long evolutionary histories. Some lineages stretch back hundreds of millions of years. If a plant lineage survived from the Cretaceous to the present, it might carry adaptations that seem inexplicable now. But that made perfect sense when dinosaurs were still around. There's a tree in Madagascar called the baobab. It's bizarre looking, with a massive swollen trunk and branches that look like roots reaching toward the sky. The tree can live for thousands of years. Its trunk stores enormous amounts of water, and it has unusual features: bark that's fire resistant, flowers that bloom at night and are pollinated by bats and lemurs, fruits that are enormous and fibrous. The baobab's adaptations have puzzled scientists. Why does it need such a massive trunk? Why the night-blooming flowers? Some have suggested the tree evolved these features in response to Madagascar's unique environment. But Madagascar is an ancient island, one that's separated from mainland Africa while dinosaurs still walked the earth. What if some of the baobab's features are relics of that ancient world? What if they evolved in response to pressures that no longer exist? It's impossible to prove. Plants don't fossilize as easily as animals, and the evolutionary history of most plant lineages is poorly understood. But the baobab, and trees like it, are reminders that the past is still present, encoded in the biology of living organisms, waiting to be read by those who know how to look. There's one final realm we should explore before we close this chapter. The realm of convergence and mimicry, where the boundaries between what was and what is become blurred. Evolution sometimes repeats itself. The process is called convergent evolution, when unrelated species, facing similar environmental pressures, evolve similar features. Sharks and dolphins, for instance, look similar because both are adapted for fast swimming in open water, but they're not closely related. One is a fish, the other a mammal. Their similar shapes are the result of convergence, not ancestry. Now consider this. If modern animals can evolve to look like ancient ones, could ancient animals have evolved to look like modern ones? Could surviving dinosaurs, isolated and adapting to new environments, have evolved features that made them resemble mammals or birds or reptiles that we're familiar with? Could they have become so changed that even if we found them, we wouldn't recognize them as dinosaurs? This is the deepest form of the ghost lineage problem. Not just species that left no fossils, but species that survived and transformed so completely that they're hidden in plain sight, classified as something else entirely. It's unlikely. Dinosaurs have distinctive skeletal features, hip structures, skull characteristics, limb proportions that are hard to mistake. Even if a dinosaur lineage adapted dramatically, those fundamental features would probably remain, at least in traces. But probably isn't the same as certainly. And in the history of paleontology, there are examples of creatures that were classified incorrectly for decades, even centuries, because they evolved in unexpected ways. Take the whale. When early fossils were discovered, scientists didn't realize whales were mammals. They looked too much like fish. It took careful study of their anatomy, finding vestigial leg bones hidden in their bodies, recognizing mammary glands, understanding their breathing adaptations, before the truth became clear. Whales are mammals that returned to the ocean and evolved to look like fish. They're an example of such extreme convergence that their true nature was hidden. Could there be dinosaur lineages that survived and evolved in equally extreme ways, that adapted to environments so different from their Cretaceous origins that they became unrecognizable, that live among us now, classified as something else, their true identity hidden by millions of years of adaptation? It's a fascinating thought, and while it's almost certainly not true, it reminds us that nature is more creative, more adaptable, more surprising than we often give it credit for. That the categories we create, dinosaur, mammal, reptile, bird, are human constructs imposed on a natural world that doesn't respect boundaries, that life flows and changes and transforms, and sometimes what we think we know is wrong. As we bring this exploration to a close, we're left with more questions than answers. And perhaps that's as it should be. The question of whether dinosaurs and early civilizations coexisted is, at its heart, a question about the nature of knowledge itself. How do we know what we know? How certain can we be of our reconstructions of the past? And what do we do with the anomalies, the gaps, the hints that suggest the story might be more complex than we've been taught? Science gives us a framework for understanding the past, built on fossils, radiometric dating, geological strata, and careful reasoning. That framework tells us the dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago, long before humanity evolved. And the framework is strong, supported by mountains of evidence, refined by generations of scientists. But frameworks are models, not reality itself. They're tools for understanding, and like all tools, they have limits. They work best when the evidence is clear and abundant. But when evidence is scarce, when we're dealing with rare events, with species that lived in small populations, with environments that don't preserve fossils well, the frameworks become uncertain. The models give us probabilities, not certainties. And in those uncertainties, possibilities linger. The caves wait, hidden chambers unexplored, ancient art undiscovered, spaces where the surface world and the underground meet. The polar ice melts, revealing landscapes that have been frozen for millions of years, exposing secrets that have been waiting in darkness. The genetic code whispers of connections we don't yet understand, relationships between species that challenge our neat classifications. The ecosystems carry echoes of interactions long forgotten, adaptations that hint at pressures from species we thought were gone. None of this proves that dinosaurs and humans coexisted. The evidence is circumstantial, fragmentary, open to interpretation. The most likely explanation remains the one we've always had. The dinosaurs went extinct long before humanity evolved, and the myths, anomalies, and mysteries have other, more prosaic explanations. But most likely is not the same as certain. And in the gap between likelihood and certainty, there's room for wonder, room for questions, room for the kind of curiosity that drives discovery and keeps the past alive. So we ask, what if? What if the boundaries between ages are more permeable than we think? What if survival is more persistent, more creative, more tenacious than we imagine? What if the myths contain memories, the caves hide evidence, the ice preserves secrets, the genes carry messages from a time we thought we understood? We may never know for certain, but in asking, we honor the mystery. We honor the vastness of time and the resilience of life. We honor our ancestors who looked at the world and tried to understand it, creating stories that have echoed across millennia. And we honor the dinosaurs themselves, those magnificent beings who ruled the earth for longer than we can truly comprehend, who left behind not just fossils but questions that connect us to the deepest past and remind us that the Earth story is still being written, that new chapters are discovered every year, and that somewhere in the unexplored places, in the hidden spaces, in the depths of ice and cave and ocean, fragments of that ancient world might still linger. Not likely, but possible. And in that possibility lives the spark that drives all discovery, the refusal to accept that we know everything, the courage to question what we've been taught, the willingness to imagine that the past might be stranger and more wonderful than we ever dared to dream. Sleep now and carry these questions with you. Let them live in the boundary between waking and dreaming, where the impossible and the real meet and dance. Let them remind you that mystery is not something to be feared or dismissed, but something to be celebrated and explored, because the world is vast, time is deep, and the story of life on Earth is far from finished. As we near the end of this journey, let's step back and consider what we've explored. We've walked through the known timeline of extinction and emergence. We've examined myths that describe creatures eerily similar to dinosaurs. We've looked at anomalies in the fossil record, at living fossils that survived against all odds, and at the possibility that humanity's history is deeper and stranger than we've been taught. We've imagined what it would have been like if the two ages overlapped, if early humans encountered the last dinosaurs in remote jungles on isolated islands in the twilight of one era and the dawn of another. We've considered the scientific arguments against this idea and the gaps in our knowledge that leave room for doubt. And through it all, we've asked the same question. What if? What if the boundaries between ages are softer than we think? What if extinction is never absolute and survival is more tenacious than we imagine? What if the myths we've dismissed as fantasy are actually memories, distorted by time, but rooted in something real? We don't have definitive answers. We may never have them. The past is vast, and the evidence is fragmentary. But the question itself is powerful. It challenges us to think beyond the accepted timeline, to consider possibilities that seem impossible, and to recognize that our understanding of history is always incomplete. Because the truth is, we don't know everything. We can't know everything. The Earth has existed for 4.5 billion years, and humanity has been studying it for only a few centuries. The fossil record is a puzzle with most of its pieces missing. The geological record is written in a language we're still learning to read. And the myths and legends of ancient cultures are echoes of voices that spoke long before writing was invented. In those gaps, in those silences, possibilities linger. And one of those possibilities is that the age of the dinosaurs and the age of humanity weren't as separate as we've been taught. That somewhere, in some forgotten corner of the world, the two ages touched. That the last giants and the first storytellers shared the same sky, however briefly, and left behind whispers that we're only now beginning to hear. So as you drift towards sleep tonight, imagine that world. Imagine a jungle at the edge of time, where mist rises from the ground and the air is thick with the scent of ancient earth. Imagine a creature moving through the shadows, massive, reptilian, a survivor from an age that was supposed to be gone. And imagine a human, small and fragile but clever, watching from the trees, remembering and passing that memory down through generations until it becomes a myth. Imagine a sky where pterosaurs glide on leathery wings, their silhouettes dark against the setting sun. Imagine a coastline where early humans gather, pointing upward, their voices filled with awe and fear. Imagine the stories they tell that night around the fire, stories that will be told again and again until they become legends. Imagine a world where the past and the present aren't separated by an abyss, but connected by threads, fragile, nearly invisible, but real, where the age of giants and the age of intelligence overlapped just for a moment, and left behind traces that we're still trying to understand. We may never know for certain if the dinosaurs and the first civilization coexisted. The evidence is too fragmentary, the timeline too vast, the possibilities too strange. But the question itself is a gift. It reminds us that history is not a closed book, but an ongoing mystery, that the past is deeper and stranger than we imagine, and that the line between myth and reality is thinner than we think. So let the question linger. Let it echo in your mind as you drift into sleep. Let it carry you into dreams where the impossible becomes possible, where the ancient and the modern meet, and where the greatest mysteries are not the ones we solve, but the ones we allow to remain. Because in the end, perhaps that's the real truth. Not that the dinosaurs and humanity coexisted, but that the possibility itself, the wonder, the mystery, the refusal to accept easy answers, is what keeps the past alive, what keeps us searching, questioning, imagining. And in that search, in that questioning, we find something more valuable than answers. We find connection to the earth, to the deep past, to the countless generations that came before us, and the countless more that will come after. We find a sense of humility, recognizing how little we truly know. And we find a sense of awe, marveling at the vastness of time and the resilience of life. So sleep now, and dream of a world where the boundaries between ages dissolve, where the last dinosaurs and the first humans walk the same earth, breathe the same air, and share the same sky, where the myths are memories and the memories are real. And when you wake, carry that wonder with you, because the past is not dead. It's not even past. It's alive in the stories we tell, the questions we ask, and the mysteries we refuse to let go. The age of the dinosaurs may have ended 65 million years ago, or it may have lingered, hidden in the shadows of the world, until it touched the age of humanity and left behind echoes that we're only now beginning to hear. And perhaps, in the end, that's enough. Not certainty, but possibility. Not answers, but wonder. Not the closing of a mystery, but the opening of a door. A door that leads into the deep past, where giants once walked, and where the first humans looked up at the sky and wondered what else was out there, waiting to be discovered. Sleep well, and let the mystery carry you into dreams. Let's talk about what we're still discovering, because if there's one truth that undermines every certainty we hold about the completeness of our knowledge, it's this: we're still finding new species, hundreds of them, every single year. In 2024 alone, scientists at the Natural History Museum described 190 new species. The California Academy of Sciences described 138 new species, including 32 fishes, 17 leaf bugs, 15 plant hoppers, 14 worms, 12 skinks, and more. The Ocean Census announced the discovery of 866 new marine species. And these are just the formal descriptions, the species that have been studied, documented, and published in scientific journals. Behind these numbers is a more sobering reality. Scientists estimate that we've identified only 1/10 of all species on Earth. 9/10 of life remains unknown to us, hidden, waiting to be discovered. Some of these discoveries are small, insects, microorganisms, fungi, but others are astonishingly large. In Peru's Alto Mayo landscape, scientists uncovered 27 species new to science, including 4 new mammals: a bat, a squirrel, a spiny mouse, and an amphibious mouse. In a region with high human population density, 4 mammals. In 2024, in a place where humans live, if we're still finding mammals, warm-blooded creatures that live on the surface, that leave tracks that can be seen. How can we possibly claim to know what else is out there? How can we be certain that the fossil record, which captures less than 1% of all species that ever lived, tells us the complete story of what survived and what didn't? Consider the implications. In Peru's Alto Mayo alone, 27 new species were found during a 2-month expedition, while the greater Mekong region yielded 234 new species. These aren't ancient fossils. These are living creatures, breathing the same air we breathe, existing in a world we thought we understood. And the ocean. More than 100 potentially new species were found on an unexplored underwater mountain off Chile's coast, an entire mountain beneath the sea, covered in life we never knew existed. How many more mountains are down there? How many more ecosystems remain completely unknown? Here's what strikes at the heart of our certainty about the past. If we're still discovering this much life in the present, how can we possibly know what existed in the past? If a living mammal can hide from us in a populated region of Peru, if an entire mountain of marine life can exist unknown in the ocean, if we've only catalogued 1/10 of current species, then how reliable is our knowledge of what lived and died 65 million years ago? The answer should humble us. We don't know. We can't know. Not completely. Not yet. Let's deepen this further, because the discoveries aren't just about quantity, they're about the nature of what we're finding. In 2024, scientists discovered the northern giant hummingbird, now the world's largest hummingbird. Adele, bird, the largest of its kind. How do you miss the world's largest hummingbird until 2024? The answer is, you don't look carefully enough. You assume you already know. You classify different populations as the same species when they're actually distinct. This happens constantly in biology. 9-banded armadillos were thought to have a huge range, but genetic testing revealed they're actually 4 species, including the Guianan long-nosed armadillo. We looked at these animals for decades, even centuries, and thought they were all the same. We were wrong. If we can be wrong about birds and armadillos, creatures we can see, touch, study in the wild, how much more wrong might we be about creatures that existed millions of years ago, that we know only from fragmentary fossils that lived in environments we can barely reconstruct? The fossil record tells us that dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago. But the fossil record is built on absence, on what we haven't found in rocks younger than that date. It's an argument from silence. And silence, as we're learning every time we discover a new species, is not proof of absence. Consider what paleontologists call ghost lineages, the term for species that must have existed, based on genetic or evolutionary evidence, but for which we have no fossils. These ghosts haunt the evolutionary tree, invisible but necessary, their existence inferred from the species that came after them. The Denisovans were ghosts until 2010, an entire branch of the human family tree, existing alongside us, interbreeding with us, leaving genetic traces in our DNA, but completely unknown until a fingerbone fragment revealed their existence. They lived, they were real, and we had no idea. If an entire human species can be a ghost lineage, how many dinosaur lineages might be ghosts? How many species survived, evolved, and vanished without leaving fossils? How many might have survived much longer than we think, living in populations too small, or in environments too inhospitable for fossilization? There's another pattern in these discoveries that deserves attention. where we're finding new species. Discoveries were made in all sorts of environments, from the deepest, darkest depths of the ocean and the highest peaks of the Himalayas to a living room in South Wales. That last part bears repeating, a living room in Wales. A new wasp species was found on the Rice University campus in Houston, leading one researcher to note, "You don't have to travel to a distant rainforest to find new and beautiful things. You just have to step outside and look." New species aren't just hiding in remote jungles or deep ocean trenches. They're everywhere, in populated areas, on university campuses, in our homes. We're surrounded by biodiversity we haven't yet catalogued, life forms we walk past every day without recognizing them as unknown. Now extrapolate that backward in time. If we're missing species that live among us today, how many did we miss that lived among our ancestors? How many creatures existed in the margins, too rare to fossilize frequently, too localized to leave widespread evidence, too unusual to fit our categories when we did find them? The paleontological record is written in stone, but it's written in a language with most of its words erased. We're reading fragments, reconstructing sentences from scattered letters, building narratives from chapters that are mostly blank pages. And every time we discover a new living species, we're reminded of how much we're missing. Let's examine what these discoveries tell us about survival, about adaptation, about the tenacity of life in unexpected places. Some of the newly discovered species exist in environments that seem impossible. Deep-sea creatures living in darkness and pressure that would crush most life. Desert plants surviving in soil too poor to support anything else. Cave-dwelling animals that have been isolated for millions of years, evolving in complete darkness. Turrid gastropods possess venomous harpoons used to catch prey, producing peptides with potential applications in pain relief and cancer treatment. A drug used to treat chronic pain was originally developed from a related snail family. These aren't just curiosities. They're sophisticated organisms with complex adaptations, living in the deep ocean, unknown until now. If a venomous snail can survive in the deep ocean, developing chemical compounds we never imagined, adapting to conditions that seem hostile to complex life, what else might be possible? What other adaptations might exist in places we haven't looked, in creatures we haven't found, in lineages we thought were extinct? Life is more creative than we give it credit for, more persistent, more adaptable. We keep discovering this over and over with each new species that emerges from the unknown. And each discovery should make us less certain about what couldn't have survived, about what couldn't have adapted, about what couldn't have persisted against all odds. The dinosaurs faced a catastrophe beyond imagining. The asteroid strike, the darkness, the cold, the mass extinction that killed 3/4 of all species on Earth. We say they went extinct. We say they couldn't have survived. But couldn't is a word that keeps being proven wrong. Couldn't survive in the deep ocean. Wrong. We keep finding life there. Couldn't survive without sunlight. Wrong. Cave ecosystems prove otherwise. Couldn't survive in extreme cold. Wrong. Polar life thrives where it shouldn't. Couldn't survive in isolation for millions of years. Wrong. Living fossils like the coelacanth demonstrate otherwise. Every couldn't in biology is provisional. It means we haven't found evidence of it yet. It doesn't mean impossible. It means unknown. And the unknown is vast. There's another dimension to these discoveries that connects directly to our question about dinosaurs and early humans: the role of indigenous knowledge and local communities in finding new species. 3 new frog species were given scientific names, but the researchers noted that local ecological knowledge often precedes formal scientific documentation by generations. The people living in these regions already knew about these animals. They had names for them. They understood their behaviors. But Western science, arriving late to the conversation, treats them as discoveries, as if they were never known until scientists documented them. This pattern repeats across the world. Indigenous peoples describe creatures that Western science dismisses as folklore. Years or decades later, those creatures are discovered, found to be real, to be distinct species, to have existed all along. The Komodo dragon, the mountain gorilla, the okapi, the giant panda, the saola. Each of these was known to local peoples long before Western scientists discovered them. Each was described in local stories, local knowledge, local understanding of the natural world, and each was initially dismissed by Western science as myth, as exaggeration, as impossible. So when indigenous peoples in the Congo describe the Mokele-Mbembe, why do we dismiss it? When tribes in Papua New Guinea describe the Ropen, why do we assume they're wrong? History suggests we should at least investigate, should at least consider the possibility that their knowledge, built on generations of observation, of living in these environments, of understanding their local ecosystems, might contain truths that Western science hasn't yet confirmed. This doesn't mean every cryptid is real. Most aren't. Most are misidentifications, exaggerations, or cultural symbols, rather than biological species. But some turn out to be real, and we can't know which ones until we investigate with open minds and respect for local knowledge. The same principle applies to ancient knowledge. When cultures around the world tell stories about dragons, about giant reptiles, about creatures that sound like dinosaurs, why do we assume these stories are pure invention? Why don't we consider the possibility that some of them, however mythologized, might contain kernels of observation, fragments of real encounters, memories passed down through countless generations? Oral traditions have proven capable of preserving information for tens of thousands of years. If they can remember changes in sea level from 12,000 years ago, if they can describe extinct megafauna from 40,000 years ago, why couldn't they remember encounters with even older creatures? Encounters that happened in the deep past, when the boundaries between ages were less clear than we assume. Let's turn now to what these constant discoveries tell us about the nature of scientific knowledge itself. Science is not a body of fixed truths. It's a process of continuous revision, of constant updating, of perpetual refinement. What we know today will be corrected, expanded, and sometimes overturned by what we discover tomorrow. This isn't a weakness of science. It's its greatest strength. Science works by admitting uncertainty, by remaining open to new evidence, by changing its mind when the data demands it. But somewhere between the process and the public understanding, something gets lost. Science becomes presented as certainty rather than as our current best understanding. The timeline of Earth's history becomes fixed rather than provisional. The extinction of the dinosaurs becomes absolute rather than highly probable based on current evidence. The identification and official registration of a new species can take up to 13.5 years, meaning some species may go extinct before they are even documented. Think about what that means. By the time we discover a species, study it, and formally describe it, more than a decade might pass. During that time, other species are going extinct without ever being discovered at all. We're losing biodiversity faster than we can document it. This creates a strange temporal paradox. Species that exist now might go extinct before we know they existed, becoming ghosts that we'll only infer from their ecological impact, from the gaps they leave in food webs, from the evidence of their existence that we might find decades or centuries later. If this can happen in the present, with all our technology and scientific infrastructure, how much more must it have happened in the past? How many species existed, evolved and vanished during the 65 million years between the asteroid impact and the emergence of humans, leaving no trace we've yet found? The answer has to be countless species, entire lineages, evolutionary experiments that flourished briefly and disappeared. And among those countless unknowns, could there have been dinosaurs, small populations living in isolated refugia, slowly dwindling over millions of years until they finally disappeared? Or until they encountered early humans and became myths? The probability is low, the evidence is absent, but the possibility remains, hovering at the edge of the unknown, because the unknown is so much larger than the known. There's one more aspect of modern species discovery that illuminates our question: the role of genetic analysis in revealing hidden diversity. Many of the recent discoveries aren't new sightings. They're new understandings of things we thought we already knew. The armadillos weren't newly found. They were reclassified as 4 species instead of 1. The giant hummingbird wasn't hiding. It was mistaken for a related species. These creatures existed in museum collections, in scientific literature, in field guides, but we didn't recognize them as distinct until genetic analysis revealed the truth. This happens constantly now. DNA testing reveals that what we thought was one widespread species is actually multiple localized species. That what we thought was a simple evolutionary history is actually a complex web of divergences and convergences. That what we thought we understood is far more intricate than we imagined. Applied to paleontology, this principle suggests something profound. The fossils we have might represent far more diversity than we recognize. What if some fossils we've classified as variants of known species are actually distinct species? What if some we've classified as from one time period are actually from another? What if the boundaries we've drawn between ages are artifacts of our classification system rather than reflections of biological reality? We can't extract DNA from 65 million-year-old fossils. The genetic material is long gone, degraded beyond recovery. So we classify based on morphology, on the shapes of bones, the patterns of teeth, the structures of skulls. But morphology can be misleading. Closely related species can look different. Distantly related species can look similar. Sexual dimorphism, age variation, individual variation. All of these can make single species look like multiple species, or multiple species look like one. Without genetic data, our classifications of dinosaurs are educated guesses. Well-informed guesses, based on careful study and comparative anatomy, but guesses nonetheless. And if we're constantly revising our classifications of living species when we get genetic data, How confident should we be in our classifications of extinct species where genetic data is impossible? The answer, if we're honest, is less confident than we often sound. The dinosaur family tree is constantly being redrawn as new fossils are found and new analyses are performed. Species get reclassified. Relationships get revised. What we thought we knew changes. And if the details are constantly changing, might the big picture change too? Might the timeline of extinction be more complex than we think? Might some lineages have survived longer, adapted more quickly, persisted in places we haven't looked? Probably not, but possibly. And that possibility is worth holding on to, not because it's likely to be true, but because it reminds us how much we don't know. Let's bring this full circle, back to the question that started this exploration. Could dinosaurs and early civilizations have coexisted? The answer that science gives us today is no. The evidence says they were separated by 65 million years. The fossil record shows no dinosaurs in younger rocks. The timeline is clear, well supported, refined by over a century of careful study. But science also tells us, through every new species discovered, through every revision to the evolutionary tree, through every ghost lineage revealed by genetics, through every supposedly extinct species found alive, through every local knowledge tradition proven correct, our knowledge is incomplete. As one museum director noted, in order to fix our broken planet, we need to keep learning about how life evolves and how vital its diversity is. We need to keep learning, not because we know everything, but because we don't. The discoveries of 2024 and 2025 and every year are gifts. They're reminders that the world is larger than our catalogues, more complex than our theories, stranger than our textbooks. They're invitations to wonder, to question, to remain curious about what else might be out there, waiting to be found. And they're warnings against certainty, against assuming that absence of evidence means evidence of absence, against believing that what we haven't found doesn't exist, against closing the book on mysteries that might not be solved. Did dinosaurs survive into the age of humans? Probably not. Almost certainly not. The evidence is overwhelmingly against it. But could they have? Could small populations have survived in isolated refugia, adapting, enduring, living on the margins of the world until early humans encountered them and created myths that echoed across millennia? Given how much we're still discovering, given how many species remain unknown, given how many times we've been surprised by life's persistence and creativity, the honest answer is we can't completely rule it out. That's not the same as saying it's likely. It's not the same as believing it happened. It's simply acknowledging the limits of our knowledge, the vastness of the unknown, and the humility that should come with every new species discovered, every old assumption overturned, every ghost made visible. The dinosaurs almost certainly went extinct 65 million years ago, but almost certainly isn't certainly. And in that tiny gap between almost and absolute possibility lives not likelihood, not probability, just possibility. And possibility, tempered with respect for evidence and scientific method, is where discovery begins, where wonder lives, where the boundary between the known and unknown remains permeable, inviting us to keep looking, keep questioning, keep discovering what we thought we already knew. The world is still revealing itself to us. 190 new species in 1 year from one museum, discovered everywhere from ocean depths to living rooms. Life is everywhere, hiding in plain sight, waiting to be recognized. And if that's true now, in our well-mapped, satellite-surveyed, technologically advanced present, how much more true was it in the past? How many species lived and died without leaving fossils? How many survived in places we haven't excavated? How many stories contain truths we haven't yet recognized? We don't know. We can't know. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. But we can keep looking, keep discovering, keep remaining open to the possibility that the past is stranger than we've been taught, that life is more resilient than we assume, and that the boundaries between ages might be softer than our timelines suggest. Sleep now and dream of discovery, of species unnamed, of possibilities unexplored, of a world that's larger than our knowledge, deeper than our certainty, and stranger than our theories. Dream of the unknown, because it's vast, and it's waiting. And somewhere in that vastness, questions linger. Not answers, just questions. The kind that refuse to fade, that echo across time, that connect us to the deepest mysteries of life on Earth. Questions like, what else are we missing? What else haven't we found? What else is out there waiting to surprise us? And yes, even this question, could the dinosaurs and the first humans have shared the same world, however briefly, in some forgotten corner of time and space? Probably not, but possibly. And that possibility, that tiny, improbable, wonderful possibility, is worth preserving, not as belief, but as wonder, not as conclusion, but as invitation to keep looking, keep discovering, keep remaining curious about the vast unknown that surrounds our small island of knowledge, because the world is still full of mysteries, and some of them, against all odds, turn out to be real.